Hey everybody, Dustin DePirac here, calling this Jeremy Price.
Here we are.
It's like the third time we've tried to film this. It's working now, so yay. Anyway, Indiana survives, advances. Really didn't survive's not really the word because they pretty much handed it to Illinois. Illinois made a run, got it back to within 8 with about 15 minutes to go, 8 minutes and 15 seconds to go in this game. IU ends up winning 80-64. They will advance. They will play Wisconsin, which came back to beat Michigan after a hideous first half, but they came back and scored like 49 points in the second half, which Wisconsin never does, but they found a way today.
It's like a whole game's worth.
It's more than a whole game's worth for Wisconsin sometimes. But anyway, starting with Indiana, basically they did everything that they didn't do the first game against Illinois, really, which means they put them away. In a situation where they were starting to slow down a little bit, playing a little bit lethargic, seemed like they were just getting a little bit tired. Illinois started scoring some points, getting some buckets, hitting a couple threes, but really getting a lot off of dribble penetration. Instead of allowing Illinois to come back, they pretty much just put the proverbial foot in the throat and whatnot, and put Illinois away. Started hitting some more shots, kept getting the ball inside, kept defending really well. They had just an excellent game defensively, and pulled this one out. Just had sort of showed the maturity that they didn't show in Champaign.
Yeah, and I think this game kind of confirmed what the first game sort of led up to, at least for the first 25 or 35 minutes or so of that game, which was Indiana was definitely the better team, the superior team.
Athletically, talent-wise, all those things, yeah. And they just...
And they let it go the first time. And this time, they built that lead, and they did all the things they needed to do to finish the game. They kept their poise. They kind of kept their foot on the gas, if you will, and they took care of the ball down the stretch, even though turnovers were not a strong point during
like
most
14,
of the game.
but still,
down the stretch when it mattered against the press, it was not. It was a non-problem.
Right.
You could say Illinois' press was awful. Or you could say Indiana's press breaker was really good, or probably both.
Yeah, it just really wasn't effective at all. I barely even thought about the press or wrote about it in my game story until didn't think about it until you just mentioned it, because it didn't really accomplish much. They got the ball inside, really was the biggest thing. Cody Zeller was dominant as we've seen him. And especially in the first half, he was 9 for 11, 24 points, 9 rebounds, and they just were determined to get it in there. I mean, I asked just, okay, what was the difference? What did you do differently? They said really the difference was in the first game, they didn't get the ball to him a lot just because if he was going to face a double team, they were trying to move the ball someplace else. This time they were like, let's invite the double team if we have to. We'll get the ball in there. He'll find somebody. He ended up having 2 assists. But really, even when he was being double teamed, he managed to score, got a lot of points off rebounds, and just was able just to outwork the guys that were defending him.
Yeah, he had 14 in the first half, 6 in the first 3.5 minutes of the second half. So he had 20 points with 16.5 minutes left to play, and at that
he didn't
point,
have
you were
another
thinking,
field goal, oddly enough.
Yeah, I was thinking 30, 35 point game possibly at that point. But and that's probably the one thing that Indiana should look at is
why couldn't they get the ball to him in the last 16
get away
and a
from
half?
getting Cody Zeller the ball.
Yeah.
And that's especially true going against Wisconsin, because if you'll remember, that was the game where Cody had, I believe, 18 points in the first half against Wisconsin.
He dominated Berger, and I don't know that if he barely scored after that.
Yeah, had maybe 4 or 6 in the second half of that game.
Not a lot.
So if that follows a similar script tomorrow, IU just needs to keep it in the back of their mind that Cody Zeller needs to keep touching the ball.
Yeah, and he did. I mean, he at least got to the line a couple times when they needed to get there, and that's kind of one place where you really put the game away, and that's where he was able to hit 4 free throws in between about the 3 and the 2 minute mark, which were pretty big, just kind of kept them afloat. And they hit some shots down that stretch. Really, though, they defended really well, and they did a lot of things. I thought they were a lot more disciplined this time. They didn't leave shooters in the corners. I didn't think that was as big of a deal as they made it out to be in the first game. If you watch the film, sometimes they left guys they had to. Yogi Ferrell, I think, got chastised for leaving a guy on a 3, and he just did that to keep a guy from having a breakaway layup. But more or less, I mean, they stayed with him, and I thought Victor Oladipo and everybody that guarded Brandon Paul did a pretty good job. I think he held him to 2 for 13 shooting, even though he had 16 points. I thought Jordy Hulls had a great game on DJ Richardson.
I thought the defense all around was outstanding for about the first 12, 14 minutes of this game. I would say that for that stretch, that might have been the best defense Indiana's played all season. They really had Paul locked down. Richardson wasn't getting anything. Abrams wasn't getting penetration in the lane, and they weren't overhelping on that penetration when he did get in the lane.
Right.
And they weren't giving him anything easy at the rim either.
No.
So during that stretch was about as good as it gets for Indiana's defense.
Yeah, and a part of that was, Illinois' offense was a little bit lethargic. It didn't seem like they were really pushing. It took a while for Brandon Paul to really start attacking. He seemed to be just sort of settling for jumpers for a while, and eventually he started taking the ball to the rim, and he got a couple buckets that way. His two, but his big one, obviously, he had the and one he got against, just going up against Watford. But he wasn't really aggressive on that for a while. DJ Richardson certainly was just sort of sitting back and looking for jumpers. And they didn't really get much going there. They finally got some dribble penetration going early in the second half. But yeah, no, they were extremely good in the first half. I don't know how long when did Illinois finally break 10 points?
I'm not sure. I think it was around the 8 or 9 minute mark.
They played about 11 or 12 minutes before they scored 10 points. They were right about like 8 or something like that, or 9. And it was. They just totally overwhelmed them. Just defensively, just didn't allow much of anything. I think this was one of those cases where you saw why this Illinois was a better matchup than Minnesota. Is that Minnesota could have at least kept getting the ball inside to Mbakwe or something like that, and they could take Richardson and Paul out of the game to a certain extent.
Yeah, Illinois is not going to pound the ball in the post. They're not. They got some offensive rebounds in the second half, but for the most part, they're not a big pound the boards kind of offensive rebounding team. So they're not going to generate points that way. And when you leave a team to score on the perimeter, and you've got defenders like Yogi Ferrell and Victor Oladipo out there doing their job, it's going to be a very tough day for you all the way around. The points Illinois did get on the perimeter were well earned and much more contested shots this time than even the first time around, like you were mentioning.
Definitely.
I think the shots they hit this time were shots that you just tip your cap and go, okay.
Yeah, they got a couple looks. That was about the extent of it. Cody Zeller was phenomenal in terms of just breaking up ball screens, basically just blitzing ball screens and getting by people. One of the most impressive plays I think we saw today was when they had somebody was screening Oladipo off of Paul, and Paul might have had a good look if Zeller wasn't standing right there, didn't rip the ball right away from him and take him all the way for a dunk. That was just a play that you don't see a lot of 7-footers make. Obviously there's some other guys that are good at ball screen defense, good at blitzing ball screens, but he just ripped that thing out from him.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, it was mind-blowing. Victor Oladipo had a shaky start offensively, but I think he scored 8 points in the last 5 minutes or something to finish with a double-double, 12 and 11, including this crazy 360 dunk that for him is pretty ordinary and average. For other people was utterly, completely impossible. That was pretty impressive. But
it's a luxury Indiana has. They have a Cody Zeller, who's a player of the year caliber player that can take over a game for the first 25 minutes or so, and then they've got a Victor Oladipo, another player of the year caliber guy that can take over the last 6.5 minutes. I think he had 10 of his 12 points in the last 6.5 minutes.
I think he did. I think he was right around 2 with 6.5 minutes to go, and then he had 10 from that point on. Free throws, dunks, everything. Jordy Holes couldn't find a shot, ended up with 7 assists. Defended pretty well. Christian Watford looked a lot better today than he has in recent weeks. Well, he was 4 for 4 from the field.
Remy Abel hit a couple shots.
Remy Abel hit a couple shots, which we haven't seen in a while. Yogi Ferrell got to the rim. A lot of guys, a lot of decent performances. That really kind of put it all together today, and again, just made sure that there was not a collapse part 2. Basically in this one, and going forward now they get Wisconsin in the semis, and it's Wisconsin again. This obviously you've only played them once this year, but it is the unstoppable force, the immovable object game, more or less. Wisconsin does not like to run at all. Indiana likes to run all the time. How can they control this one and dictate pace and do what they want to do as opposed to letting Wisconsin do what it wants to do?
Well, I think this is an interesting game because it'll be a good measure of how much progress Indiana's made over just the last couple of weeks since that Minnesota game, because you think back to the Wisconsin game, the Minnesota game, those are the games where Indiana has really struggled to get the game going the way they want to get it going. I think, maybe they put in a little bit of a press against Wisconsin, but it's a tough thing to do. They handle that really well. They've got a lot of guys that can handle the ball.
They don't turn the ball over at all.
I think the biggest thing is just to get defensive stops. And Wisconsin had not been shooting the ball well until the second half of today's game against Michigan.
Not well doesn't really even put it in perspective. Let's see here. I've got that's more than kind. I believe it was 17.2%. They were 5 for 29 from the field in the first half. Wisconsin was, and yet somehow in the second half shot 60.7%. So that makes sense. Of course.
So the big thing is for Indiana to get defensive stops, and that was the same case against Illinois when Indiana was getting defensive stops in the first half. Even though they had some of the turnovers, they were able to get runouts. They were able to get easy buckets, open jumpers in transition, and what have you. And I think they're going to be looking for more of the same against Wisconsin. But you've got to get those stops, and you've got to get the rebound first, and then go from there.
Okay. Last thing, because we're getting close. Does this clinch a 1 seed for Indiana? Do you think this game was enough to do it, to lock it up?
yeah, I think this clinches a 1 seed wherever that may be. The Midwest 1 seed, I think there's still some work to be done to sew that one up. But a number 1 seed, I think that's pretty much Indiana's. I mean, what, nine wins, I think, over top 25
something like that
teams now, most in the country. It's hard to argue against that.
Yeah, the tough thing, I still keep looking at Louisville, and in terms of Midwest and Indiana, I think Indiana might not have to win again, but it needs Louisville to lose at some point in time. I mean, I think in a way the road got a little bit better for Indiana because Louisville doesn't have to play Marquette. They're playing Notre Dame. That's not as impressive a win, I think, if they get it in the semis. But they still, as far as I know, I haven't even seen any of the Big East scores yet today. But if they get Georgetown, I mean, Louisville could still build its resume up, and maybe, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think Indiana's still safe. But anyway, we'll see. Certainly, if they win tomorrow, that makes it a whole lot more moot of a point. Thanks, guys.